This is the CPCU Champion Hour. We have an interview with two, not one, but two new designees, and we're talking about insurance language and whether it needs to change. Let's roll. Here we go.
We're talking about a lot of these things. We're talking about how to mentor.
File that under only the best decisions are made after midnight.
Right. That's right.
Your network is your net worth. Connect with someone.
Let's go. This is like, we're time traveling a little bit. This is the first episode that we are recording in the new year. And so there's like all kinds of renewal and all kinds of new opportunities that are happening. So this is absolutely fantastic. A reminder, we are the CPCU Champion Hour. We are a production of the CPCU Society, the Institutes, and the CPCU Society volunteers. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell. Tell us what you think about what's going on. Comment in the comments below, and definitely take part in trivia. I will be putting that in the future. So we've already had a couple of winners. We're going to announce a couple more so that we can get some swag out there. So this first in the new year, not the newest episode that's being released, but in the new year, the first one that we're recording, we have a fantastic idea for an icebreaker question. And it is, what is the word of 2022? What is your word that you're kind of using to frame your 2022 experience? In our pre-planning, Precious was extremely exuberant. She knew what her word was. So, Precious, I'm going to put it on you first. What is your word for 2022, and what does it mean to you?
Pick me. Yes. My word for 2022 is embrace. So I think about, as a professional in my space, a space where I'm still very much a face that sticks out, that I have spent the better part of my career trying to shrink down into spaces that fit, trying to overcompensate, even mask some of the things that I've always viewed as being kind of a distraction to my message. But I'm leaning all the way in. If it's not obvious by the gray hair, I'm accepting all of these things that really make me unique and more so make me valuable. I think it's important that we have messaging that comes from all of us, that represent all the different facets and corners of our society, and that we play a role in this industry. So I'm beyond trying to assimilate. And now I'm just embracing, my full authentic self and showing up completely. So that is my goal. I'm committed to it for 2022.
I love that. Heather, your thoughts, and also what is your word for 2022?
No, I think that's fabulous, Precious. That's really encouraging, just because I think all of us try so very hard to fit where we feel like we have to fit. But what it really is about making sure that space is fitting with us as well, and recognizing whenever it doesn't. So awareness of that is fantastic for anyone who's working in our industry. But my word for 2022 is create. And it's about, number one, because I'm pushing out and working very hard to create and push the creative juices towards my book that I'm writing this year. Secondly, it's about creating moments where the magic can really happen, and creating those moments not just for myself but for other people who are in my life, creating creating spaces to where other people can feel invited into my life, and ways that I can help others through that. And then, of course, creating energy in the space of insurance itself, because we can get a little boring at times. So I think it's important for us to keep people engaged, to keep that next generation engaged, especially. We have to create energy within the insurance industry. So my word for 2022 is create.
I love that. It's both you have takes on it that are they're kind of in line with we were talking beforehand. Like, I didn't necessarily had a word, but like I'm just thinking about what you guys were talking about, and the word thrive just really kind of like comes up, and it's because we've come from 2 years where it's been the word probably should have been survive just for 2 years, like right, like it's just like do whatever you need to in order to kind of like build that foundation, and do whatever you have to do in order to persist and get through whatever the impediments that were in our way. And this year I fully believe that we've gone through 2 years of creating kind of like foundational change in our lives. And some of it was necessitated by, again, survival, and some of it was simply necessitated based off of the changing environment and our changing priorities. 2022 is the year to really kind of push that into gear, right? It's to take that next step and really commit to the new kind of like I like the idea of like launching pads, right? I'm a gigantic science nerd. I love NASA. I love Tesla and freaking rockets and all kinds of other stuff, right? Like when the Mars rover went up there and they were taking pictures of the surface of Mars, like I was geeking out like crazy, right? There is a launching pad to be had from the last 2 years. And so if you look back at those things that you've had to go through to create that foundation to then jump off of, or at least take a step forward from, I would love if that was something that I was able to do. And then, hell, if people can come along with me, fantastic. So I love the idea of like thrive. But I also love the fact that you guys are talking about action words that are forward thinking and creative, and kind of like distilling things down to what actually matters. If it wasn't thrive, and I would love to hear your opinions on this, my word would have been family, because I've spent a lot of time with my family over the last 2 years after being a workaholic for the most part of like 3-4 years starting an agency. And there was an acclimation period, and now I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't want to leave these people. Like I don't want to go away. Like I don't want to spend time in an office somewhere else. I would rather do my work in the house. Just really quickly, like, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I would say we've all kind of adjusted to this world where we are work and life really don't stop in between each other,
Mm,
and there's not that pause anymore. And at first it was really clunky and odd, and children in the house and trying to figure that out for a lot of people. But now it's almost like you've developed that symbiotic relationship in between that work and life, and you can move in between them a lot easier. It's not like you're stuck in the transporter in between
mm,
things anymore. And I think we all appreciate that, because we've learned to adapt, adjust, and thrive,
mm.
embrace, and even create in those worlds, where we never thought we would be. So
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, Matt.
Love it. Love it. Precious is like, I've spent a lot of time with my family. I don't know. I'd like to go back to the office. No, I'm kidding.
No,
What are your thoughts?
what I think is really interesting is kind of the exposure element, not from what the pandemic, uses to exposure, but just even my family, since I work here, I'm within earshot. They kind of see and they appreciate a little bit more what I do. I think now. I think it was kind
Yeah.
of this abstract thing that mom works in insurance. We don't really know what that entails,
Oh yeah.
and in their mind, I was just sitting behind spreadsheets, crunching numbers angrily all. But they hear the calls and the Zooms and the conversations, and they realize that there's a human element, that this is very much a relationship driven industry. And so they
Yeah.
have a greater appreciation, of what I do, because, it was taboo to take work home before.
Yeah.
But when workspace and home space is all kind of intermingled now, we've kind of learned and can kind of see, jokingly, my husband, who's been in the transportation space as a driver for years, he used to always tell me that, oh, there can't possibly, like, the work that you do is not strenuous. All right. I said, well, I'll be the first to say that I'm not out there like stacking like bags, of cement. But there is a lot that comes to troubleshooting and strategizing and collaborating, so it's a different, not to say that I want anyone to feel bad for what I do. This is what I
Yep.
chose. This is what I love. But it demystified a little bit, at least for my household, what it is that I do on a day to day. And they have a greater appreciation of, you know, how do you work in insurance but still build up people, still, show empathy, still have a good time? Like, you're laughing most of the time. We can't tell if you're on duty or not. So so now they understand a little bit more about me, even
Mm.
though I'm mom, and I've been here the whole time, but I'm here in a different way now.
Yeah. And what's funny is you just made me think, like, in the moment of all of the legacy like family agencies and insurance companies that have come up through the prior couple hundred years. A lot of the sons and daughters and nieces and nephews and cousins work there, right? They did filing, or they actually worked doing the customer service rep kind of work. And nowadays it's it's not commonplace for the family to understand what you do as an insurance professional every single day, and bringing that into the home maybe demystifies that a little bit. And I love the fact that you've been able to kind of like let your husband know, like, look, even though I'm not carrying around 50-pound bags of cement, I'm actually sweating some things out and actually having to like deal with some adversity here, and like trying to work on some stuff and get things done. So I love that. There's always
We
this
work hard,
misnomer
cut
that
us some
if you
slack.
work, yes, there's always this misnomer that if you work in an office, it's always like cushy and like carefree and laissez-faire, and like you can just like whatever, I'll do it tomorrow. And you're like, no, I have to get this done by 11:59, because if it clicks 12 or 12:01, the coverage isn't in place. Like we got to get this done. um so I digress. That being said, COVID continues to be at least part of the narrative, and does factor in still to the words that we attribute to 2022, and things that we're looking to accomplish. And so in that vein, we have a insurance news minute that is in line with the continuing progression of the coverage determinations that come with COVID-19.
And in our insurance news minute of the week, as Matt was talking about, the COVID-19 rulings related to business interruption have continued to roll through. And just today, this came out that the 10th Circuit has joined that growing list of appeals courts that's sided with an insurer in a COVID-19 business interruption case. This has been difficult. This is a tough situation because insurance contract language is complicated, and people feel the need to be compensated for loss. But the U.S. Court of Appeals, this information just came out today. The 10th Circuit Court was the latest court to find that an insurance company had no duty to cover business losses stemming from a COVID-19 shutdown orders. This stems from a lawsuit from Goodwill Industries of Central Oklahoma, my home state. That's just a nonprofit organization, as you know, that provides community services, operates those retail stores out there. They did sue their insurer, Philadelphia Indemnity Insurance Company, in May 2020 underneath their commercial lines policy. And Judge David L. Russell of the U.S. District Court had previously granted Philadelphia's motion to dismiss, finding that the policy did not cover goodwill's loss, and the policy's virus exclusion actually ended up barring coverage resulting from any virus or disease. They took it up to the appeals court, but the appeals court reaffirmed that opinion with the circuit court. So this is still going to be a continuing litigated issue. But once again, it helps us to ask bigger questions as we're moving through this pandemic and moving through this time. What happens next as it relates to this type of coverage and this type of pandemic situation? Back to everybody else.
So what's funny is what we were talking about offline before the beginning of recording was when you put in your query into Google. I think you queried something about insurance language and accessibility or something like that. What was like one of the first one or two results that you ended up getting when you put that into Google?
That was Bill Wilson's commentary, of course, because he is Mr. Coverage when it comes to the insurance contract and insurance policy language.
I'll tell you what, he has been at the forefront of talking about whether or not, like, this is the thing. Insurance people, if you're a non-insurance person, you're watching this. First of all, please, I'm going to throw the banner up again. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. We're going to help you out. Okay. We're going to demystify some stuff for you. All right. So definitely do that. But so, Bill Wilson, insurancecommentary.com. He was one of the first people that was actually taking a position on whether or not, certain types of claims were going to be covered. And in the vast majority of situations, he knew that there was probably not going to be coverage for this. And it was because of specific exclusions, but also it was because of baseline policy language in the insuring agreement that really kind of translated back to this. And so he put out a lot of stuff right at the beginning of this, before the courts even had their rulings, talking about how, a number of these claims were probably going to be pushed back on, with the exception of some non-standard, insurance policies that might be out there. But those were going to be the outliers. The standard insurance policy probably wasn't going to pick up for this. So huge props to Bill. Like, again, we don't make any money. Like, Bill doesn't pay us a royalty or anything. Bill, if you do want to sponsor the program, like, by all means, please, we're more than open. But we don't get any royalties from Bill. But he was the first one to put his neck out there and basically, kind of talk about these things and really kind of try and temper the expectations that were out there associated with this type of claim. Let me throw it to you, Precious, like really quickly, in terms of being like a broker and insurance agency owner. What was the expectation of the insureds? Did they expect that there was going to be coverage for this, or it was something where you really kind of like had to hold their hand and kind of create, again, what Bill was doing, kind of like create that feasible realm of expectation before they submitted these types of claims?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting is when we look at, for example, the evolution of the commercial package policy with most carriers. So eons ago, everything was a la carte. You basically built it from scratch, right? The only thing that was really what made it a package is that there was a liability element and that there was a property element. Everything else, endorsement by endorsement, you kind of built it to suit whatever the insured requested. And that way pricing, could be flexible because you added what you wanted, you didn't put on there what you didn't want. As you continue to move through the evolution of this process, most carriers started to understand that there's certain exposures that are just innate to specific classes of business. Right. So it's almost impossible to have a restaurant without having some sort of spoilage exposure. right?
Yep.
You're not going to have a beauty salon that doesn't dabble in chemicals, okay? And so what we did is we started creating these packages, these suite of coverages that were just really specific to that type of exposure. And so some of these things could be opted out of, so you could pull them back out in some instances, but you didn't rely so much on the consumer to know and foresee and to build something, a product, a vehicle that they'd never driven before.
Yeah.
And so when I look at these sort of things and I look at the coverage that's there, there's certain things that are anticipated. And so the things that are anticipated are the things where coverage is added and is recognized and is included, and everyone feels good because they can see it in black and white that this is covered. When we run across instances like the reality we live in now, where we have circumstances that were unanticipated even by the best of the thought leaders in this space, it was hard to imagine that we'd be in a place in time where we had massive closures and widespread business interruption that wasn't catastrophically driven as far as weather events and things like that. And so as the front line, are these conversations we had with every insured? Absolutely not. Because just like society couldn't anticipate it, we had no way of saying, hey, by the way, we have this massive virus outbreak, what is your policy going to do? That was beyond the scope of what most of our risk analyses included.
Yeah.
We were concerned about the in-your-face threats, right? The thefts, the fires, things of that nature. So this is really difficult. But to Heather's point, now that this is commonplace, this is an opportunity for us to revisit. If these are the sorts of things moving forward that we've now lived, what unimaginable is now imaginable, what do we do about it? Is that something that we can take back to the actuarial desks where we can model and figure out what are those size of those losses so that those can be incorporated and built into our filings and our rates? But that's really at the core of what we're discussing here. It's not necessarily that we don't want to cover one or two specific losses, is that these are outside the scope of what was anticipated when the pricing was pulled together. And so if we start opening this up, that's how carriers go insolvent. So it's not good for anyone. But the problem is society at large looks at this and says, well, there goes big corporate, stepping on the small man, and they're going out of their way to not honor their promises. But we can't just pay out everything that feels good.
Yeah. What's interesting is, this is kind of like, clandestine. We have an interview with two attorneys that have gotten their CPCU designation, and we're going to talk about basically, disputed or discussed in court, right? That the meaning of words and the intent of including certain words in a contract, and some very interesting points come out about that. But to your point, Precious, this was something that I don't think very many people were really anticipating. There were some folks that would, essentially be considered fringe that were saying like, this could be a possibility, but really it wasn't something that was immediately in our faces, and it wasn't immediately in the faces of our clients or our insureds. And as a result of that, it wasn't necessarily something that was in the common public conversation up until the present, or at least the last couple of years. So definitely something to keep in mind as we go forward and go through this. We'll have an interview that you did, Precious, with a couple of new designees from a attorney firm in the Pacific Northwest. But before we get to that, I want to tee it up for you, because we have a couple of events that we want to talk about that are coming up here in January for the CPCU Society. And so with that, here's upcoming events.
So So it is officially top of the year, January 2022. And as always, there are so many events to look forward to, and the calendar is starting to fill up with the various presentations that you can expect from the CPCU Society in the next couple of weeks. So the first one that we're talking about today is in the webinar series. So on January 27th, yours truly is going to be hosting the webinar. The title of it is Embracing DEI, which is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to Reduce EPL Risks. So as we continue to think through and talk about not just the changes that have occurred because of the pandemic, but some of the new exposures now when it comes to social unrest, due to, political reasons or whatever the case may be, different work environments, there's an increase in certain types of exposures that may leave organizations vulnerable. And so that is really the focus of this webinar, is to talk about how a genuine implementation of the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives in the HR toolbox, if you will, can really help organizations get in front of some of these new exposures on the EPL front. So I look forward to having you guys join me for this conversation in January, and also keep your eye on the the webinars that are coming through. So as members, these are ones that we have access to. They're remote, they're free to CPCU members. So again, continue to watch for that. And I'm really excited to have the platform and the opportunity to have this discussion, with the professionals that are all part of our society. So in addition to the webinar series that are rolling out, now is the time. We have a couple of key events that we host as the CPCU Society. And so registration is going to be opening for the March event. This is going to be for the Reinsurance Excess Surplus Line Symposium. So more to come, I think, currently, and this should probably be live by the time you're listening to this message here, but you can save the date for it right now. And then, of course, registration is going to be open. This is going to be really, just like all of the events that we host, full of information, insights. If this is the space in which you currently exist, you don't want to miss this, because we are always looking for ways to stay abreast of the changes, the innovations, and all the things that affect our ability to really be, successful in this space. So more to come on that, but that is the first major event that is on deck, and registration should be open for this event shortly.
No, I love the fact that we have a bunch of stuff already starting to populate the calendar. There's going to be more. So if you are interested in joining us, again, we have a wide swath of different types of membership that are available in the CPCU Society. If you would like to join us for one of these events, definitely check out cpcusociety.org and go to the events calendar, as well as if you are on the mailing list for these things, definitely take part in them, because if you're already a dues paying member, you don't pay anything extra to go to these things, and they have some huge value that come associated with them, because you're, someone like Precious. I normally, if you go to one of her courses for, who are you teaching for now, Precious? The Insurance Institute. If you're going to one of those, you're going to pay out of pocket in order to go. And, hopefully you get you some CEs or something like that goes with it. But if you're already a dues paying member of the CPCU Society, you already have a ticket to dance, so to speak. So you get to go to one of those events and, get some fantastic, really concentrated, quick, good information that comes with it, and actionable information, which is really important. It's not all like, theory and kind of like, words on a chalkboard. It's some stuff that you can actually implement in your organization and help yourself out or help your clients out, and really kind of build out that value proposition so you can set yourself aside from your competition out there in the marketplace. So yeah, awesome. All right. So that being said, I feel like this is like Precious's episode, because she's like she's been killing it. I love it. We also have an interview that is our CPCU champion profile. We have two attorneys of all types of people, attorneys that have gotten their CPCU, and a good friend of ours, Paul Rosner, was the catalyst or the facilitator for these folks getting their CPCU designation. But Geoff Bedell and Jennifer Dinning got their designations. And just before I roll the interview, Precious, what really kind of like popped out at you in terms of their interview, like why they got the designation, what they kind of got out of it, or what they're looking to get out of it in the near future?
Yeah, so we had a lot of fun having this discussion, so I hope that you enjoy watching it as well. And really my takeaways was that both of them, even as established professionals in the legal community that work within coverage defense and are well engrossed in the insurance industry, saw the value here, the value to really learn and understand the industry in a new way, in a more meaningful way, which in turn helps them to do their jobs even better, because they have a greater appreciation of all of the moving parts. So yeah, that was really not to be too much of a spoiler alert, but the crux of their motivation. And I think that is really something that we sometimes forget, those of us who've gone through this program and have gone through, the rigor of the designation, that this is still something that is highly regarded, that is well respected, and that others are still embracing to help them level up and sharpen their skills as well.
Love that. Yep. So in that case, I'm going to roll the interview. This is our CPCU champion profile with Geoff Bedell and Jennifer Dinning. Enjoy.
And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Jennifer Dinning and Geoff Bedell with Soha Lang. So thank you guys for taking time to speak with us on the CPCU Champion Hour. Congratulations on earning your CPCU designation. So as new designees, if we can just start off with some introductions and kind of share what it is that you do and a little bit about your CPCU journey. So we'll start with you, Jennifer.
Well, thanks so much for having us. I'm an insurance coverage attorney at Soha Lang in Seattle. I do coverage advice, both personal and commercial lines, first party and third party. And I do bad faith defense litigation as well. And we started, Geoff and I actually started our CPCU journey together, I want to say about 4 years ago, at the strong encouragement of our partner, Paul Rosner, who was already a CPCU.
Paul's fantastic. I'm not surprised that he would have encouraged you to come on board. And how great to be able to have someone to join you in this process and kind of work through it together as a cohort. So what did that look like, Geoff, working together with Jennifer towards the designation?
Oh, it was pure cutthroat competition. We were gunning to see who got through first, and she beat me by a week. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, it was really helpful. It was nice to go through the process together. And we were actually able to share books, which was kind of nice. But also have somebody you're just talking to about not so much the precise things you're learning, but just what do you got to do next and how did that go? Jen was invaluable too in terms of hipping me to, there's some kind of app out there, and I'm officially known as the firm Luddite at Soha Lang. And there was a practice app that was just wonderful. And I would commute with a bus, and I'd be sitting on the bus doing my practice exams, waiting in the doctor's office. I'm doing my practice exams. It was just wonderful. So it was great.
Oh, yeah. The tools that are out there now are amazing. And I love that they can kind of break it down into small, immediate responses. So you don't have to get all the way through like a section. You get that real-time feedback when you click on an answer. Is it right? Is it wrong? And then it gives you stats as you go so that you can kind of see, how often are you answering these things. So I'm really interested to hear as far as the approach. So did you agree ahead of time on taking the core first? Did you kind of intermix that with some of the electives? What path did you go? Did you go the personal route or the commercial route?
Jen, do you want to start?
Sure. We both went the commercial lines route, and we started with the core. I believe we did 500 and 520 first, and then we did our elective, which we both chose reinsurance for our elective, which I absolutely loved. I thought that was an amazing course, and I was so glad, still am so glad that I took it. Frankly, I didn't know anything at all about reinsurance before I took that, and I learned an incredible amount. And then I believe we did you do 540 next, Geoff? I did 540 last. So I did everything else and then 540.
Yeah, the last one I did was the super tough quantitative one.
Yeah, the accounting, that's the 540. Yeah.
That was, and our plan was to do that in the middle and not save it for last, because it's got such a bad reputation, right? But it didn't turn out that way. I wound up doing that last, saving that for last, and frankly, I passed it first try, and it worked out just fine. It probably took me a little more ramping up, but it was perfectly doable at the end of the day.
Awesome. Yeah, there are certain ones that are known to be kind of the reputation precedes it. The great stumbling blocks. So having Paul as a resource, of course, is phenomenal. Did you plug into any other resources like social media groups or to connect with other CPCU candidates during your journey?
I joined the CPCU candidates Facebook group, and there's a lot of tips traded and inspirational stories. I know some folks managed to finish their CPCU journey in what seems to me like a phenomenally short period of time, a matter of months rather than years, as Geoff and I took. But different resources and encouragement is always really positive. And I found there was a lot of positive encouragement and good advice in the social media groups for CPCU.
Awesome. Geoff, did you also tap into that group, or did you find support elsewhere?
I did not really use any other support in terms of doing the course curriculum, other than, as I mentioned, doing the apps and whatnot. However, when we were both candidates, we joined the local CPCU chapter as candidate members.
Oh, fantastic.
And so we were sort of I was sort of informally hashing things out with folks who are already members, and as well as Paul and some other people. So we did it that way, but it wasn't so much focused, at least in my part, on, the course curriculum, but so much of just being members and seeing what they were up to and talking to them more generally about the CPCU process and the program and the society. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's something that, of course, we highly encourage for those that are in pursuit, the candidate members, to plug in and really kind of get that exposure to all of the different types of CPCUs that there are. We're not a monolith. We come from all sorts of industry backgrounds. Our contribution, whether we work for a carrier, work for an adjusting firm. So getting involved as a candidate member, let's talk about that just for a little bit. Did you feel embraced and welcomed and like I said, encouraged? Obviously, you completed the program, so you had whether it be internal, external support in doing so. But how was your candidate involvement with your local chapter?
I would say it was really positive. We were able to attend meetings and meet CPCUs. There's just a wealth of resources just, in the local folks that you didn't know you wanted to know. And, the camaraderie, I think, is really great, and definitely felt welcomed with open arms. Got a lot of positive encouragement and heard plenty of war stories about other folks' CPCU journey, particularly, everybody has the test that they thought was the hardest. So very interesting to hear everybody's perspectives and hear about, how other folks have used their CPCU going forward, and how they have, enjoyed and benefited from participating in the organization, and the CPCU Society was really great too.
Fantastic.
And I was going to say, we went to they had local lunches, monthly lunches. So we were doing that. We went to I-Day. I went to I-Day several times, still do, just went to I-Day as a member. And also I spoke a couple times, and I believe Jen did as well. at a couple of events where we were doing presentations on, in our case, Washington laws or Washington attorneys. So we were both doing that as we were candidate members. And, I'd get up there and the first thing I'd say is, it's like Garth and Wayne, where I'm not worthy, I'm a candidate. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. So that feels pretty good.
Awesome. So speaking on that, because both of you are attorneys, and so education is not something that is foreign to you, and continuing education and professional development and growth. What would you say, if I had to, I guess, almost compare and contrast like your legal journey to your CPCU journey in terms of like rigor and the program itself? Because obviously both of you've completed the program, so it's doable. But if you had to make those comparisons, how did that compare?
Well, that's a hard comparison. Should we start at law school or our continuing education journey after becoming attorneys?
Well, let's go. Well, yeah, I mean, we can't stack, the CPC is prestigious as it is. It's not law school. So let's talk about just even professional development wise, in terms of like application to how does that enhance the professional knowledge that you need to do well at your job?
Great. Yes, I think it has been a really great enhancement. Both Jeff and I, we work with insurance companies and the insurance industry, but we are not technically in the insurance industry. And one of the things that I felt CPCU did for me was help me to understand a lot more about the mechanics of what everybody in the insurance company is doing every day, and some of the limitations that they might have on what they can and can't do, both because of the law that governs and regulates insurance companies, and because of things like reinsurance relationships. It helps me understand how to offer better solutions when I'm trying to help with a problem. And it also provided a common language that I understood the same terminology that the people I'm speaking with understand. The courts don't always use the same words that you use in the company. And as lawyers, we learn the court words.
Of course.
So CPCU put all of that into the same language that the insurance industry speaks. It's like suddenly we communicate so much better than ever before. And it's, all because of this.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and for me, it sort of gives you the big picture of what Jennifer alluded to, insurance operations more broadly, and that's helpful it contextualizes a lot of things. And before I forget, that contextualization continues now through our participation in society, because it's not a bunch of lawyers. In fact, mostly it isn't lawyers, and you're meeting folks in various, and not just in the claims department where we're typically meeting with claims folks, but you're meeting with a lot more underwriters, brokers, there's some risk managers involved, and so you continue to have that broader context, even once you're done with the coursework. So that's generally, and more specifically, as a lawyer, at least it's been my experience with insurance, you learn it sort of case by case and issue by issue without the collective whole. And so by doing that, you know what you've worked on in the past. You don't necessarily know stuff you haven't seen, because why would you? And so it really, and I took it a little later in my career. I've been doing coverage for, 10 plus years at that point. And it really was a gap filler in some areas of coverages. And it would kind of give a better understanding of how coverages fit together holistically. And there were also some areas, and we've alluded to this, with like reinsurance. I was starting to work on reinsurance issues, and that's the reason we took that reinsurance elective. It's been very helpful with reinsurance. And in fact, because I had done that, I only needed one more course to get my ARE, the Associate in Reinsurance. So I actually, when I was done with CPCU, I just took one more course, and I also have an ARE. And
fantastic.
Because I found it so helpful. But it really has helped deepen my understanding of the coverages, because it teaches you the coverage in a different way, not just case by case, but looking broadly as a whole of how insurance policies and specific coverages are supposed to work. it also increases your frustration because, kind of getting back to what Jen said, courts do not look at it that way.
Okay.
Courts do not look at insurance as the way it's really supposed to operate, because they're looking at everything case by case, and they're looking at everything based on the case law, interpreting this or that or the other thing. And so it's something that I'm able to bring that I think is advantageous to me.
Right. And just to elaborate a little bit more on that last point, understanding the difference between how the folks who are creating and selling the insurance products intend it to work versus how the court is likely to look at it is very important when you are giving advice to the insurance industry. So that is really invaluable.
Awesome. It sounds like, again, this was an eye-opening experience that has given you perspective and hopefully compassion for all the different challenges and things that we all face. I think too often we're kind of operating in silos, and it's really, again, it's tempting to look at something standalone and say, well, why did this happen, or why did that happen? But when you kind of plug in and get that holistic view of who we are as an industry overall, and the CPCU curriculum, of course, is designed, to give us just that. So now that you've completed the CPCU, and you've mentioned that you are involved with your local chapter, have you connected with or joined any of the interest groups that are available to you? And if so, which ones?
I have been a part of our diversity and inclusion committee here in the Pacific Northwest chapter, which has been a great experience so far.
Awesome.
And I've been involved in like the local I-Day and I've been on committees to putting together certain presentations and things such as that. And that's what I've done to date. And my hope is to continue to be active and perhaps get more active going forward. I would say we got involved as CPCU members at a strange time because of the whole context of COVID and the fact that monthly meetings, disappeared. We had to do I-Day. Things have been cut back because so much of the person-to-person interaction has sort of been stayed. And so I'm hoping, looking forward, that obviously the world returns to what it was, and that will open up and get us back to business as usual, and be active once it's more return to form.
Of course. Yeah, I think one of the things to, takeaways, especially as, new members of the society, new CPCUs, is that, during these challenging times for sure, the society has really attempted to create some of these virtual remote spaces where we can still connect, such as the Interact website. There are various chat forums that are constantly sharing information where you can post, and all contributors, we're all citizens of this society, right? And so the more we collaborate, the more we contribute, it really enriches the experience for all of us. And so I think is really important, especially with your special lens, with where you sit, connected to the industry, that we have access to, hear it from your perspective, because, we, again, that share of information is really what makes this helpful. So if anyone watching this program today wants to connect with you, to kind of pick your brain, understand a little bit more about the things that you've seen, what would be the best way to do so?
Well, you certainly could email me. My email address is dinning@sohalang.com. Soha Lang also has a LinkedIn presence, and I do as well. I believe, Geoff, you have a LinkedIn also?
Yeah, I've got a LinkedIn presence. We also have a firm website, and if you Google our names, Attorney Jennifer Dinning, Attorney Geoff Bedell, Seattle, you'll just hit us right away. So we can run, but we can't hide. My email is name. It's BEDELL @Soha Lang. That's SOHALANG.com. But the simplest way is probably just to Google us.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think that again, we're so fortunate to have you now as part of our CPCU family, and I'm sure that after this, is shared, that you'll have folks that'll reach out to you. Also, avail yourself of all the things that are available, not just with the CPCU Society, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with the CLM, the Claims Litigation Management. So they're kind of our sister organization, and as a CPCU, you can join as a fellow. I believe it's free of cost. And so there's lots of programming and events and things that happen there as well that are very specific to, again, that claims litigation side of the business. But yeah, there's all these perks, all of these professionals to connect with. So we encourage you, of course, to reach out. I know that when you come from a chapter that has so many resources, we're very similar down here in Dallas. We forget because it's enough with what we have here that surrounds us. But plugging in, like moving into the deeper part of the pool, is also something that we encourage everyone to do. So we really appreciate you taking the time to give us that insight on what motivated you. And my final question for you is, if there's someone who maybe has a similar professional background as you do, what would be your words of encouragement in terms of even strategy on how to navigate their CPCU journey?
I would say take it one course at a time, and small chunks. We all get busy, and it doesn't necessarily matter how long it takes. Just keep taking one bite out of the apple at a time, and eventually you'll finish it.
Yeah,
and it's well worth it.
I was going to say what Jen said. We would sort of stop and start. We'd take a course, then one of us would get too busy and then not do a course. It could be a year between courses depending on the workflow. And so be patient, give yourself that flexibility if you're doing what we're doing, which is practicing attorneys. The other thing is, even before you're done, as you're working through, you still have that knowledge that you've learned. So before you get the credential, as you go, you're learning more and more. And we keep going back to the reinsurance example, but that was the third course I think we took, and I immediately was using that. So as you go, you're learning things. And the last thing is the app. I can't stress how useful I found the app, just because it was portable and because I was able to do that in my downtime. And here's a hint: after I would read a chapter, I would crunch through the app and do the quizzes when it was still fresh in my mind, and keep repeating that to try to keep it going in my head, rather than like reading the whole book and going back. I was really going chapter by chapter and trying to really jam each chapter as I did it, because it can be, I would find it too difficult to have read the whole book, because there's so much going on in each book, and then try to do it. I really took it chunk by chunk every week as I was doing a course. And I found that to be the best way for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that when I was taking the courses, I had a strategy. I would kind of give it a dry run before I opened up the book, just to kind of gauge where I knew, especially if it's something that I was somewhat familiar with. And then based on that feedback, I knew where I needed to do a deeper dive, read it further. But to continue to check that temperature with those resources is really invaluable, because then you can develop a strategy on where to spend your time. So I'm glad that that's something that has benefited you as well. Well, again, we thank you so much for being generous with your time and sharing your insight and knowledge. And if there's anything that we can do for you, of course, please reach out. But yeah, we will share this with the community, and I'm sure you'll have people reaching out to you for more information. So thank you again, and pass our best wishes along to Paul, and thank him for continuing to champion, the CPCU designation, even in-house with his peers.
Thank you so much
for having us.
My pleasure. All right. Have a good day.
So one thing that was really interesting that came out of that interview was I believe it was Jennifer who brought it up. Jennifer was talking about the idea that she had been through, law school and learned the legal terminology that was associated with being an attorney. But really the CPCU and kind of furthering her education as far as the insurance industry information was concerned, really centered a lot around language, just how terms are used or intended to be used. And that's a very big word, like the intention of the use of certain types of language. And so I just kind of wanted to dig down a little bit on on that to kind of like sum up this episode. I think it's something that when, you and I, Precious, when we talk to the lay person, or even maybe Heather, when you're talking to, friends and family, a lot of people will talk about the somewhat inaccessibility of insurance, just from the standpoint of the fact that we use different words for things. And some words seem like they're halfway words, or they are words that don't make sense to a certain situation. Let me start off by saying, what do you think of the terminology do we use? Do you think it's effective, or do you think that there is something that is, really needs to change in terms of how we're referring to certain types of coverage, and the products that we're crafting with the insurance industry? And I'll give you the first at bat, just because you're coming directly out of this conversation with Geoff and Jennifer.
So I really think that context is everything, that we have to have specific language. We have to really define, that the vocabulary, the glossary even, that's used. I think about, even just from a legal contract perspective, that the very top of a contract usually defines who are the parties. Right? No
Mm,
different than what we do in a policy. And so sometimes it not only defines them, but it says, for the rest of this document, we'll refer to them as the tenant, as the,
mhm,
whatever, so that we have that baseline. That's where we clear up how and when we're going to use language. So a slightly different comparison is that I think most people who do business with me know that I speak Spanish. I'm not a native Spanish speaker. I learned to speak Spanish really through, I was in restaurant management for a number of years immediately out of school. And so I speak Spanish and I speak English, but when I have conversations, especially with insureds or with claimants or whoever I'm interacting with, we usually have to choose which place we want to occupy, for the pure reason that I'll pick on again the vowels. Okay, so in English we
mhm,
have A-E-I-O-U, and in Spanish is A-E-I-O-U, and so E in English is actually I in Spanish. So we
mhm,
have to establish how are we going to navigate, so that we can be accountable to what we've agreed upon. And it's really no different. So the fact that this isn't easily interpreted by the average citizen is really job security for many of us, because it requires a licensed professional to really be your liaison, to kind of walk you through and help
mhm,
you understand. No different than people are unfamiliar with finance terms or medical terms, or it's really no different than other industries that require that additional training and education in order to best understand, the landscape. So I don't think it's something that we can really scale back and still have that same emphasis that's necessary for us to be able to do all the other things. For the
mhm.
dominoes to fall, we have to have a core, set of terminology that we're working off of, in
Yeah.
my humble
So
opinion.
yeah. No, your learned, experienced opinion. No, definitely. Look, if someone has earned the right to basically talk about the type of language that's learned within or used within this industry, and you have to learn to be successful. It's present company, right? Like all of us have committed ourselves to essentially a lifetime of understanding what all of us are talking about, when especially when it sounds like Greek. And what's interesting is, so Precious and I have somewhat of a unique kind of perspective, because we're always trying to interpret things on the part of our client. As in
Mhm.
independent insurance agents, we're always trying to err on the side of coverage for our clients. And anyone will tell you who's worked with a producer for an independent agency, we promise the world, and we expect that the world gets delivered for our clients,
Oh yeah.
which is basically the way it goes. But so, Heather, you have a little bit of a different perspective. You have, in at least a past life, a claims perspective in terms of the language that's used within these policies, and really kind of the functional use of them, because at the end of the day, the claims process is the ultimate realization of whether an insurance policy is worth the paper and the ink that it's written with, right? So from your standpoint, do you think that there is something that is do you think that's effective, the language that we use, or is there really maybe some room for improvement in terms of how we refer to things, or at least how insurance policies are marketed and sold when it comes to the actual claims process?
Yeah. Well, you harken me back to days where like this is like my love, because I became a big coverage nerd really quickly in the industry. I absolutely fell in love with the insurance contract language and the interpretation of that language as it applied to claim circumstances, because I was always trying to figure out the puzzle. There's a puzzle there to try to understand how I arrive at a, you know, accidental direct physical loss or a covered cause of loss to make the policy magic happen where it's supposed to happen. What you're selling out there, I'm trying to back up the promise of that in the claims world. Claims people don't seek out to deny claims.
Mm,
Their goal is to look at the contract and apply it to the circumstance that is in front of them, with the facts and circumstances that are all taken into play.
yeah.
And I spent a lot of time in like first party coverage defense and doing those type of first party litigation claims, where I got to spend a lot of time with those coverage attorneys, that helped us to really go, okay, wow, that should not have happened in that claim, and this is what should never ever happen again. And then I also spent a lot of my time defending other people's actions that had been taken, or even
Mm,
my own actions on claim files as well. So that helped me to like deepen and broaden my understanding of why that legal terminology is so incredibly important, is because it is a true, pure contract
mm,
of accountability in between an insurance company and the person that that bought that insurance contract from them. And when you look at that policy and you have to open it up and you have to dissect the language and apply it to the circumstance, looking for what coverage is available there, you really realize that there is room for how you interpret and present that policy to an insured or to a
mm,
claimant in a claim circumstance, so that
yeah.
they can understand and realize why this is why the claim is happening and this is why the coverage is being interpreted the way that it is. That's the job and that's the onus. That's the hard part of being a claims professional, is you
Yeah.
have to be able to put that legal terminology in a place where people who are not exposed to it day in and day out, and who really could care less about it and are not coverage nerds like you, who absolutely love and just soak up the words and look for where the commas are at and look for all of those little nuances and everything within the policy. um, you have to take that language and put it in a place where someone who doesn't experience it day in and day out can realize why that their claim might not go the way that they think it's going to go, you know, and
You
help them to walk through that. And those are hard things to do. But as far as like let's take the language and let's make it so simple. Unfortunately, we live in an incredibly litigious society. I don't think we're going to get there,
mm,
especially not in our industry. We just talked about, the lawsuits that are still ongoing with business interruption coverage for COVID-19. Those are going to continue to happen because people are going to continue to challenge those barriers because of the society that we live in. But it is the job of the broker, the agent, the insurance claims professional, when that claim gets realized, to bring that contract to life so that the person who's on the receiving end of it really understands what it is that they bought.
you win the award of best lead in to the next thing that I'm going to bring up. Which we've discussed before, and this is again, take it for what it is. All respect, Mike Cassellini, but this is out of Florida. There was basically a coverage case that hinged upon the use of a comma. There was essentially a comma placed in a certain location, and anyone who is this comes up a lot, actually within recent context, in terms of like people interpreting certain aspects of like the Constitution, right, and certain aspects of the Bill of Rights and whatnot. Where commas are placed. And truthfully, at the end of the day, insurance is no different than that. It is a contract. There is language, and there is also grammar and punctuation and period based, timing based interpretation that comes with that. And what's interesting is, if you put it in front of multiple people, there you might get multiple different interpretations in terms of how that insurance contract should be or shouldn't be, enacted or executed. We also have, and this is something that has been evolving over the last couple of years, and there's just starting to be some case law that's coming out as far as this goes. But and again, we don't advocate for one insurance company or one insurance policy over another or anything like that. But so, Berkshire Hathaway was a company that endeavored to simplify the business owner's policy and create a comprehensive, simplified policy that was supposed to cover a wide range of loss, and do it effectively and do it with very few words. I mean, essentially 3 pages, if I remember correctly. I haven't sold one yet, but I believe it's 3 pages front and back. So, you can call it 6 pages if you want to call it a technicality. But so essentially a 3-page business owner's policy that's supposed to, like, you talked about, Precious, cover, a combination of different types of coverage, property, liability, and in fact, I think they also say that you could throw in workers' comp and a couple of other things. It becomes very, I'm somewhat of a skeptic sometimes, because I see some of the things that are done, and talking offline beforehand, I had even talked about this in terms of like putting in place employee manuals, like and employee handbooks for employers. Sometimes, if it's a situation that you can't come up with exact language, you intentionally use general language so that there's some jockeying room, there's some negotiation that can happen. And so that attorneys, hopefully that get their CPCU and understand insurance terminology, can then go to the court, right, and basically discuss the ins and outs of the use of certain types of terms and the intention of the use of those types of terms. It's very foreign to people, if they don't work in the industry, to understand how that is just kind of the standard, or that's something that we deal with every single day, because they want to understand how things work in black and white, right? The one thing I would say is, and I'll kick it to you, Precious, like, do you think we need to change how we deal with terminology? Do you think we need to make it more accessible, whether or not you look at it from the standpoint of the layperson, whether or not you look at it from the standpoint of cultural differences between subsets of people within the United States? We're a very eclectic country. Do you think that there's some real change that needs to happen in terms of the way that language is used, or do you think that we're doing it the right way because we're just kind of going through a process that's consistent?
So I think it's interesting how not even, yes, between industries, between regions, between people, there's always going to be variations in language. So as a insurance professional that specializes in transportation, for example, I always, kind of my icebreakers, I talk about the fact that transportation speaks a different language. When we use the word tractor, we're not referring to farm equipment. You know, when we talk about a reefer, that's the word for refrigeration, not anything nefarious. Okay. So there's
Depending on
certain,
if you're transporting things in California, right?
yeah. Hey, look, just standard stuff. Great Dane is not a pet, that's a brand of equipment. So we kind of laugh about how there's words that we use that are so they have a special meaning in that context of how we're using it. I run across insureds that have questions all the time. For example, general liability. They think general liability means like all purpose, right? So they
Mm.
don't sometimes appreciate the difference between their general liability policy versus like their auto liability policy and how they're different. They see numbers on a deck page and they realize that, you can't just add them all up and come up with like this monster aggregate. That's not how that works in that context. So there's so many things that can be confusing, and we all agree on that. I know that when I was taking the the 540, and I had to use my financial calculator for the first time, I'd never used a financial calculator prior to this. I didn't realize that it didn't work like a standard calculator. I couldn't just say 1 + 1 and find the equal sign. That you had to solve for different pieces of a larger problem. And so I stand by the answer is becoming better at being an advocate for these individuals, these communities, these households, or whoever it is that we work with. The
Mm.
intention is not to make it intimidating. As Heather mentioned earlier, the intention is not to avoid coverage. And it really puts that emphasis on those of us who are on the front lines, yet again, to make this language come off of the paper, use scenarios. I've seen tons of carriers that do that in a very effective way, especially in the executive and management liability lines, where we'll actually spell it out. Hey, this is some actual, real life cases, right? And
Mm.
this is what the context was, and this is what the outcome was, and allow the customer to kind of put themselves in that position, especially when it comes to things that are still relatively new concepts as people are trying to figure out what cyber insurance is really about.
Mhm.
What does that truly cover? And so with all the different coverage parts, to be able to illustrate those things, to be able to explain it to in the depth to where there's buy-in, because I really think that's what's missing a lot of times. If you don't have the buy-in during the buying process, it won't be there during the claims process. And so
Mm.
at least when it comes up again in the event of a loss, it won't be the first time they've heard that. So we have to be thorough, not to the point where I get it, it's a little dry. It's not the most, fun subject to go in and out of. But I also remind my clients that it is still upon the consumer to make that decision. The process is you solicit a quote, right? But the quote
Mhm.
is just a quote. You're not bound by the quote unless you decide to move forward. And so that is your opportunity to ask questions and kick tires and
Yeah.
know that you understand what you are and are not opting into. So
Right.
no, I think these are just more opportunities as we move into an environment where there's more direct to client interaction. You can go online and you can buy certain types of policies unassisted. I think that is really going to be important that the carriers have, maybe pop-ups, right? So you
Yeah.
hover and it pops up and it gives you a little bit more context, or maybe there's places where they're going to have to click some more acknowledgments that this was explained to me. Now, whether I read it, no one can make sure that your eyes followed the screen, but at least you say this was made available to me and I made the best decision when all of the options were presented. So there is a little bit of heavy lifting that we have to do because we are the go-between,
Yeah.
right? We're the professional, but we can't talk over heads. We have to make sure that there's that buy-in and that understanding across the board.
Yeah. You raise an extremely interesting point, and it makes me think, in the world that we live in with Yelp and TripAdvisor, and again, not sponsored or anything, but all these different services that allow for, Amazon, that allow for a large amount of user feedback in terms of the products. Um, what's interesting is I don't necessarily see that having translated into specific products in the insurance marketplace. Now that's changing a little bit because there's a lot more app-based insurance or usage-based insurance that is now coming onto people's radar, and specifically being used by millennials and younger generation that are used to that kind of buying process, and really kind of using social feedback as a means for determining whether to buy product A or product B. But I find it really interesting that the older legacy products seem to be somewhat immune from that, and I guess it's maybe just kind of the distribution channel coming through brokers or insurance agents and maybe that is somewhat of a filter in and of itself, but it's definitely kind of like a new world that we're entering into. Um, eh, Heather, from your standpoint, do you think that we need to change the language of insurance? Do we need to, like, for lack of a better word, no offense to anyone who's not an insurance professional, but do we have to dumb it down? Do we have to water it down and make it more accessible to the layperson, or is it something that we necessarily need to keep complicated because it's a complicated business?
Well, I think I think there's a middle road. I really
Hmm.
do. And I think it all hinges upon the explanation of what the contract language really means, because
Yeah.
contract language isn't just going to change overnight because of some Google reviews out there that say that insurance contract language needs to change.
It's a good point.
It's going to change because of court systems and because of departments of insurance and because of those who write insurance contract language looking at it and realizing that it's got to become more simplified. It's got to become more streamlined. It may need to modernize in a lot of ways.
Mm,
Insurance contract language takes a long time to evolve and sometimes utilizes some old and outdated language, even in some of the older policy forms that are out
yeah.
there. So it's something that gets shaped by the court systems is what happens. That there are major changes that come to ISO forms because of large landmark cases that go through
Mm,
our court systems. Will there be that large landmark case at some point that says you have to make this simple enough for the average consumer to be able to read and understand and know exactly what it is that they're buying? You know, is there going to be that's going to make the breaking point for insurance? And what does that mean to all of the functions of insurance?
yeah.
What does it mean to the underwriter's role? What does it mean to the agent and broker's role? What does it mean to those claims professionals out there who are trusted to interpret that language and apply it to the coverage circumstances? So I think there's a lot of unknown about that. I think what we can do a much better job than we do today is fully helping an insured or a claimant to understand either when a claim happens or better yet, when the policy is bought, what it is through those scenarios, like you're
Mhm.
talking about, Precious, through helping them to walk through what it is that you have purchased or what it is that you are entering into before they enter into that contract, because it will help them to realize that, hey, there might be some gaps or there might be some things that I'm not looking at or there might be some better ways to cover this. Mold, rot, long-term damage to properties. I don't understand why that's not covered. Well, we need to have an explanation of that better up front for an
Right.
insured so that they're not turning a claim in that ends up affecting their claim histories whenever that claim is going to be looked at by an adjuster, and the adjuster is going to go, well, here is the reason why, and let me explain to you why.
Yeah.
They don't get that. What they get is, I bought this piece of paper that says that I'm going to get taken care of, and we can do a better job of really developing that relationship in a way on the front end with our insureds to say, here's what you're getting for
Mhm.
this coverage. Here's what your dollars are paying for. If you want other types of coverage, here's where we might be able to source that at. Or, oh, by the way, this isn't something that we can actually get you coverage for.
Yeah.
And that's why those detailed and in-depth conversations are so important in building that relationship and maybe kind of mending some of those bridges with that mistrust that happens of the insurance industry, of the big corporate giants that just sit out there and try to deny claims all day long.
Yeah. Wait, what's really interesting is I do some dabbling in the blockchain world and the DeFi world and this the contractual world that's kind of evolving online. And what's interesting about that is it's very distinct, right? Like there are very define triggers for coverage. So if you're talking about some kind of decentralized finance vehicle in terms of like an insurance policy or some kind of payout, there are very specific circumstances under which a payout happens, and if those circumstances are not met, the payout doesn't happen. And conversely, if they are met, then it happens, and it happens very quickly with very low expense structure associated with it. And so what's going to be really interesting, and something that I think we're really intent on bringing some folks on to discuss in the future, is how is that going to influence insurance, right? Is that going to be one area of insurance, and then kind of the legacy insurance, or insurance as we've known it to always exist, to be the supplement to that, to kind of like fill in the gaps? Or will that really kind of influence the way that insurance contracts are structured into the future? I think is a very fun, scary, interesting conversation that's going to be had over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in the insurance industry. So I'm definitely looking forward to that, in terms of just how that kind of plays out. I mean, it's a natural evolution. It's an iterative process that if things work well, they tend to reinforce themselves and perpetuate themselves throughout the industry. So it should be pretty interesting. All right, final thoughts. Insurance language. Do we need to like, if you had one thing that you would change in terms of insurance language, what would it be? I'll kick it to you, Heather, first, and I'll let Precious finish up, because again, she's kind of the star of this episode. But if there's one thing in terms of insurance language that you would change, one word, one kind of bugaboo that you have, what would it be?
I wish we defined accidental direct physical loss.
All right, this is a insurance nerd hole that we need to go down. All right, why?
It's one of those really generalized terms that you can fall into a hole if you're not careful with
Yeah.
it. Especially in those personal lines policies that are out there. It was always one of those traps where I gotta, the policy covers accidental direct physical loss unless it's specifically excluded by these specific exclusions. And people often jump over those words because the word accidental, what does that mean? What does the word direct mean? What does the word
Yeah.
physical mean? Does what loss means something different to everybody else?
Yeah.
And that ADPL, man, ADPL, that was my acronym that just chewed me up all the time whenever I was in claims. Is it ADPL?
Yeah.
And are we going to get there when it comes to coverage? Are we going to town? So I would say, I know it's been construed by courts in a lot of different ways, and it's
Mhm.
always looked at in so many different circumstances and applied in the court system in so many different ways, but we
Mhm.
don't define it. And
Yeah.
I often wonder why. Is it because it's trying to be general there, Matt,
Yeah.
because it's so broad that we don't want to put ourselves in the box of what the definition means.
Yeah.
So
Well, look, the attorneys get paid what they get paid for a reason. Let me just put it that way. If that's delicate enough. Precious, if there was something language-wise that you could change within policies and insurance terminology, what would it be?
So this is gonna come across a little maybe controversial. This is like, if all things were
I
possible.
I feel like Kermit. I'm here for it. Go ahead.
Let's see, how do I even begin to phrase this? My wish was that insurance wasn't so state specific.
Mm,
So there's certain things that it's a really scary environment as an agent, because we have a home state, and that's our place where we've tested. Those are the rules that we confirm that we're familiar with.
Mhm.
And the only difference between me doing business in the state where I'm super comfortable and a state that I have no idea what's going on is registering with money. And all of a sudden, I'm allowed to sell insurance and I don't have any idea of the verbiage that they use there.
Mhm.
Down here, again, I'm from Dallas, Texas, so we have PIP, right?
Yep.
PIP doesn't exist in all places. There are differences between PIP and MedPay, the rules between uninsured, underinsured motorists, there's all these nuances. I get and I understand why this can't be. I know that we are the United States of America and that each state has its own autonomy, and I get that. But sometimes when we talk about what makes things unnecessarily complicated,
Mm.
that's a thorn in my side, because depending on who and where you are, you could have the exact same structure, exact same cause of loss scenario.
Mhm.
And because of the paper it's on, because of the way the state requires it, you can have two completely different outcomes. And that's something that I don't think that the average person is aware of,
Yeah.
that it all ties back to, like I said, insurance has to be in step with the laws of that state, so on and so forth. So yeah, the state by state thing, I understand why it is. But if I had like some magic insurance genie out there and we can make this more of almost a federal thing where it applies to all of us, it would make life easier.
Yeah. No, I look, this is gonna sound like a cop out, but I'm gonna piggyback on that. The idea of the reciprocity of coverage, like based off of where the home state of an insured is versus where they're actually doing business, is something that really needs to be firmed up because again, like you said, depending on where the insurance policy is purchased and where the operations are happening, where the claim happens, um, terminology can be drastically different, based off of just a couple of miles of geographic location. And that's really difficult to explain to someone, right? It's easier to explain if a certain line of coverage wasn't included in the policy. That's easy to explain. It just wasn't there, right? What's really tough is to explain to insured as to whether or not something is to refer to as, what's a good example of, I'll use some, transportation example, whether something's considered on hook or not, right? Like, or just talk about, inland marine or kind of like ocean cargo, right? Like first on board, what does that constitute in terms of the state or even the country that you're dealing, doing business in? And so some level of reciprocity would help, right? Like there needs to be some kind of uh you're multilingual, Precious, right? Like there needs to be like a New Jersey to Texas translational guide, right? that you can speak insurance language from New Jersey parlance into the electronic device, and it'll spit out what it's supposed to read in terms of like Texas coverage form or whatever. I think that would be really beneficial. So look, with that, I think this has been fantastic. We could go on and on because language is basically the foundational aspect of insurance. It is essentially a piece of paper, or multiple pieces of paper with words written on it, with essentially a promise to, if you pay X, in the event of Y, we will pay Z. Is essentially what an insurance contract is. And it seems very simple at the onset of it, but in practice, it's very nuanced. It's extremely complicated. And quite frankly, again, self promotion, it helps to have the language down and a certification like the CPCU, and the education that comes with it, and the network of people like the three people that are here that can sit there and talk ad nauseum about these kind of differences, to really help you out in terms of whether or not you want to be in the insurance industry, or at least insurance industry adjacent in terms of your profession or what you do in your day to day. So huge plug for the CPCU Society. Again, I'm going to throw up the banner. Like, comment, subscribe, share, help us out, help the algorithm. We are a subjected to the algorithm. So help us out and definitely participate in our trivia in the comments below, and share this out there to any insurance professionals or anyone else who's a layperson who's like, I can't freaking read this insurance policy, it's all in like freaking gobbledygook. Definitely share that out to those people too, because believe me, we understand. You have sympathetic ears and voices that are on this show as far as that goes. So with that, that's the. Did I miss anything? I didn't miss anything, did I?
No.
We're good.
I have to make a grammar joke. I have to, because when we were talking about the commas, we were talking about the coverage decision on the commas. So when I was reading the story and they were talking about, the series comma, right? Because that's kind of the purpose of it in the contract. And look at that space already. I was reading it and I thought to myself, this is serious. Get it?
And with that, that's the end of the episode. Peace, champions.
I think these videos are brilliant, and I'm sure you will like them too. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to click the notification bell.